All right, so 7 videos later, we've gotten our way all the way through the sine function. So now we just need to go back to square one and do the same thing for cosine. So 7 more videos. Here we go. Just kidding, actually, because cosine has more or less all of the same properties as the sine function. So it's got the same kind of maximums, minimums. It's going to have the same cycle length properties as sine, with the one exception. The pattern, so instead of going like the sine curve does, where it's middle, max, middle, minimum, and then back to the middle, the pattern for cosine is you actually start at the max, then you go to the mid, then you go down to the minimum, then you're back up to the middle, and then you finish at the max. I really don't need to double underline all these, but here we are. So if I was to do a quick little just like cosine sketch, just like y equals cosine of x, so no modifications, no translations, no funny business. So this is just going to go right -1 to 1. We're just doing our usual quadrant angles, right? This would be pi over 2, this would be pi, this would be 3 pi over 2, this would be 2 pi. So the pattern here is you start at the max, which is 1, then you're down to the middle, then you're at the minimum, then back up to the middle, and then you end at the maximum. So it's really the same curve. It's got the same basic shape, the same basic properties. It's just that we're sort of, in some sense, starting the values from a different point. So sine and cosine are really just sort of phase-shifted versions of the same graph in some sense, right? If you took the cosine curve and you just shifted it forwards by pi over 2, it would look like a sine curve. And that kind of makes sense. Kind of. So this is going to be our cosine of x. And this, of course, right, would continue. And this would continue. So if we know that that's the starting point, we know that's the pattern, let's just try to run through 2 kind of medium length examples. So, and we'll just do the exact same properties that we've been doing for the sine function, right? And we'll go from there. Let's do y equals 3 times the cosine of x minus pi plus 1. This is a little bit kind of right off the dome. Let's see what we've got. All the properties are the same, right? So our amplitude here, absolute 3, which is 3. It's going to shift up by 1, right? This sort of plus 1 on the end. So what we've got is maximum at 3 plus 1 is 4. My middle value is going to be 0 plus 1 is 1. And my minimum is going to be -3 plus 1 is -2. What else did we do? We shifted this to the right by pi. B value here is 1, so the cycle length is just 2 pi over 1 is 2 pi, just the usual. And then we've got a C value here of minus pi, so we're going to shift it right by C over B, which would be pi over 1. So we're going to shift it right by pi. So what does that mean? So that means our x1 is going to be pi. What's the length here? The length is 2 pi, so my distance between would be pi over 2. So we're going to shift by pi over 2. So x2, right, this is 1 pi plus a half pi would be 3 over 2. x3 is going to be 4 over 2, which would be 2 pi. x4 is going to be 5 over 2. And then x5 is going to be 6 over 2, which should be 3 pi. That's pretty reasonable. Let's make our table. X and y. So pi, 3 over 2, 2 pi, 5 over 2, 3 pi. And then the big change, right? So really the only thing that's unique to this that we didn't already do with a sine curve is the pattern. So again, we start at the max, then the middle, then the minimum, then the middle, and then we end at the max. So what were those values? The max is 4, so 4 and 4 at the end. Our minimum in the middle is -2, and then the midpoint here, +1, right? So the amplitude, right, we're sort of doing a span, 6, sort of 3 above and 3 below, and that midpoint is +1. Put it on the paper, make a sketch. What are we leaning? A little bit more towards the positive values, I guess. This is 2, 2, 4. Where are we going? So pi over 2. This is pi over 2, so that's 1 pi. 2, that's 2 pi. That would be 3 pi. Put it all on the paper. What do we got? Starting at pi, we're up at the max. Here we're in the middle, which we'll have to kind of eyeball, right? +1. 2 pi, we're at the minimum, which is -2. We're going to back up to the middle, back up to the max. Like so. No problem. What the heck was that? That was y is 3 times cosine x minus pi plus 1. Let's do one more for good measure. Let's maybe flip it. What else could we do? Let's try to do some things we didn't just do in the last one. Let's just do negative cosine. Let's just do 1/2 x. And let's, I don't know, just leave it. I guess, sure. What more do you want? We'll do one that's a little bit more plain. So amplitude here, right? This is essentially a -1 in front. This negative value, we're treated like a -1. So the amplitude is 1. We're not shifting up or down. It is flipped, right? So my pattern is going to be, so what's going to happen? If normally I'm at the maximum, then the middle, then the min, then the middle, then the max, I'm actually going to have a minimum, then a middle, then a max, then a middle, and I'm going to end at a minimum, right? So I'm going to sort of creep up and then go back down. B value here is 1/2, so my cycle length, 2 pi divided by 1/2, that's really times 2 over 1, which would be 4 pi, quarter cycle, 4 pi over 4 is going to be pi. These are some extremely polite x values, so I'm just going to jump right to the table. I'm sure you agree. So we're not shifting left or right, so we're just starting at 0, and then we're moving chunks of pi each time, right? So 1 pi, 2 pi, 3 pi, and now it's a 4 pi, right? So that's going to be the end of our cycle. The pattern, so this is minimum, middle, max, minimum, sorry, middle, and then minimum. What are these values? Plus minus 1, so my minimum -1, my middle is 0, my max is 1, my middle is 0, and my minimum is back at -1. So this is really just a flipped and sort of extended graph. So what are we doing? 1 pi? So pi, 2 pi, 3 pi, 4 pi. Pi, -2 pi. Tie it all together. So starting at the minimum, right? Because we flipped it. Middle value, max value, middle value, and then down to the minimum. Just like that. Then we can keep it going. And that's our curve. So that was negative cosine of 1/2 x. The 2 got away from me a little bit. That looks better? Sure. So cosine, same kind of rules. Really very, very, very similar. It really is just a slightly different pattern. You're starting at a peak instead of starting at sort of a middle value. There we go. Graphing, sine and cosine.